Now you're probably selecting things on your phone, you're scrolling, clicking, and most of the time you're not really looking at a single thing you choose. Maybe before opening this video, you were looking at something else. Before that, you had something else you wanted to check. Stop for a second. Why? Why does this cycle keep going? Because something in your brain keeps pushing you into action, never letting you rest. You're always looking for the next thing, and the cycle never ends. Its effect is so powerful that in 2014, psychologist Timothy Wilson from the University of Virginia asked a question: are people really trying to avoid simply thinking? To find the answer, he designed a simple experiment. He chose university students as participants and told them, just sit and think for 15 minutes. No phone, no books, basically nothing at all. A small, harmless device was attached to their bodies. When a button was pressed, the device delivered a mild electric shock. It was simply a harmless part of the experiment. Before the experiment began, the participants were asked a question: would you pay money to receive this shock? Everyone said no, but then something very strange happened. The results recorded after 15 minutes were surprising. 67% of the men and 25% of the women chose to give themselves the shock. There was no money involved and no reward of any kind. The only reason was that they did not want to sit there doing nothing. This was not actually an abnormality. On the contrary, it was a documented fact showing just how much our brains try to avoid boredom. In other words, the brain is an organ that does not like being idle at all. And this fear, this urge to escape, actually points to a much deeper purpose than it appears to at first glance. When did boredom begin? First, we need to answer this question: why does boredom exist? Professor Brian Little from Cambridge University offers an interesting but important explanation. Boredom provides a characteristic psychological motivation to seek out new activities. Its evolutionary significance is that it drives us to try new things and acquire new knowledge. In other words, the brain is saying there is nothing left to learn here. You can't change the situation by staying where you are. Go find something else. Learn, explore, struggle, and discover. 300,000 years ago, this signal was actually life-saving. A bored ancient human would leave their place and explore. They would search for a new cave, discover a new food source, or form new connections with other people. Those who remained static and never felt the urge to seek something new lost an important survival advantage. Boredom was not laziness. On the contrary, boredom was a command to move. But there is a critical point here. This signal evolved for a world that was relatively poor in stimulation. The brain was satisfied with only a few basic inputs, such as hunting, danger, fire, and social interaction. During the remaining time, the mind stayed in a state of exploration and observation. Now that same brain is exposed to countless small stimuli every minute, and things have become much more difficult. And that changes everything. Dopamine is not actually a reward, it is a search. Boredom has dopamine in it too. But there is a major misunderstanding about dopamine. Most people know dopamine as the pleasure hormone and assume it is responsible for everything that feels enjoyable. But that's wrong. Dopamine is released not by pleasure itself, but by anticipation. It is not released when you achieve something. It is released while you are pursuing it. The primary function of the dopamine system is to get you moving, keep you engaged, push you forward, and direct you toward the next goal. In other words, it creates a constant drive for action. That is why dopamine is released until you obtain something, and sometimes even more intensely while you are still trying to get it. And this is exactly where social media and smartphones come together. Researcher Trevor Haynes from Harvard Medical School describes it this way: social media platforms use the same neural circuits that are involved in slot machines and cocaine. Every notification triggers a release of dopamine. But the biggest dopamine surge does not come from the notification itself. It comes from not knowing what the notification contains until you check it. If that's true, the situation starts to look much more serious. When you scroll, you don't know what you're about to see. And that uncertainty is interpreted by the brain as a potential reward, creating the exact condition in which the dopamine system becomes most active. Every swipe, story, like, or update creates a small dopamine boost. Fast, easy, accessible, and repeatable. Over time, this constant cycle raises the brain's stimulation threshold. According to research from Dartmouth University, heavy social media use can lower the brain's baseline dopamine levels because the brain becomes accustomed to constant high stimulation. As a result, slower activities such as studying, taking a walk, or simply sitting with your thoughts begin to feel uninteresting because they cannot compete with the rapid stream of novel content. So what does this mean? Things that once made people happy now feel boring. Reading a book feels dull. Sitting in a park feels empty. Focusing on a single goal becomes increasingly difficult. The very mechanism that once helped humans explore, learn, and grow through boredom begins to work in the opposite direction. Neurologists considered boredom to be an ordinary and harmless experience, just another state that everyone goes through from time to time. But brain imaging studies in the early 2000s changed that view completely. A bored brain is not quiet at all. In fact, it becomes highly active. According to a 2026 review by Science Insights, 2 major brain networks become active at the same time during boredom. The first is the default mode network, which is associated with mind-wandering, daydreaming, and internal thoughts. The second is the executive control network, which is responsible for attention, planning, and decision-making. Under normal circumstances, these 2 networks balance each other. When one becomes active, the other tends to become less active. During boredom, however, that balance begins to break down. In a surprisingly unusual way, both networks become active simultaneously and start competing with one another. The result is that you can neither focus properly nor truly relax. The mind becomes divided, stuck in a state of uncertainty. Professor Peter Endicott from Deakin University explains it this way. Boredom activates both the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. Negative emotions and decision-making systems are triggered at the same time. If Professor Peter Endicott's explanation is correct, this is not a particularly comfortable state for the brain. This is why boredom is not simply the absence of stimulation. It is an active state of discomfort. And when that discomfort continues for long periods of time, it can begin to turn into something much more serious. In 1968, American ethologist John B. Calhoun launched a strange experiment at the National Institute of Mental Health, creating what he called a mouse utopia, where conditions were perfect. Unlimited food and water, no predators, and no disease. In this ideal environment, mice rapidly multiplied, formed communities, and developed social structures. But as the population reached around 2,200, unusual behaviors began to emerge. Some male mice completely withdrew from social life, only eating, sleeping, and grooming themselves, while avoiding mating, fighting, and any form of social interaction as if life had lost its meaning. Calhoun referred to these individuals as the beautiful ones. Similar changes appeared in female mice as reproduction declined, maternal care broke down, and aggression increased, leading to a dramatic 96% loss in offspring survival. Within 5 years, despite the perfect conditions, the population collapsed entirely towards zero. Calhoun argued that the cause was not physical deprivation but behavioral breakdown, which he called behavioral sink, suggesting that when purpose, struggle, and survival pressure are removed, a system begins to collapse. Since then, this experiment has often been compared to human societies, with modern examples such as hikikomori youth in Japan, the lying flat Tongping movement in China, and quiet quitting in the United States being seen as similar patterns of overstimulation and lack of meaning, leading to withdrawal and social disengagement across different cultures. Now we come to the most critical part, one that is truly important. Research conducted by Jacqueline Gottlieb and her team at Columbia University shows that people who become bored easily are far more vulnerable to risks such as computer sabotage, anxiety disorders, academic failure, poor job performance, loneliness, and social isolation. And none of these risks can be ignored. In fact, boredom is strongly connected to social relationships, and clinical assessments have revealed that the most reliable predictor is a person's ability to cope with boredom. This is a crucial point because individuals who cannot cope with boredom tend to discontinue treatment, whereas those who can cope with it are more likely to stay in treatment. In other words, whether someone continues treatment or not largely depends on their tolerance for boredom. Boredom is one of the strongest predictors of addiction relapse and can easily drive an individual back toward the same behaviors. Another important factor is that boredom and loneliness are two human conditions that reinforce one another, and together they carry serious health risks. According to Julianne Holt-Lundstad's 2015 meta-analysis, which included 148 different studies and more than 300,000 participants, strong social relationships increase life expectancy, while social isolation and loneliness reduce life expectancy by approximately 26%. This effect is comparable to major risk factors such as obesity and physical inactivity. Vivek Murthy stated in 2023 that loneliness is as dangerous as smoking and chronic boredom, particularly the conditions seen in individuals who are constantly digitally stimulated but never genuinely satisfied, is considered one of the most powerful factors fueling this cycle of loneliness. This raises an important question. If modern humans have access to countless tools, spaces, and endless opportunities to spend their time, why do we get bored more easily than people in the past? The answer is actually quite simple: the reward system. Your brain is exposed to thousands of small dopamine hits throughout the day. Notifications, likes, short videos, breaking news, and endless scrolling all seem like minor stimuli, but together they continuously raise the brain's expectations. Over time, the stimuli offered by normal life, a book, a walk, a conversation, or a meal, no longer feel rewarding enough. The dopamine system stops responding to them the way it once did. And that is where the problem begins. Everything starts to feel boring, patience fades, focusing becomes difficult, and even spending 2 minutes alone with a single activity can feel unbearable. This is not a character flaw. It is a real biochemical change in the brain's architecture, and unfortunately, it is not a positive one. Research from the York University Boredom Lab in 2016 found that boredom proneness has been increasing in measurable ways in recent years, contributing to growing attention problems. Microsoft's 2015 attention study also drew attention to a striking finding, suggesting that the average human attention span had dropped from 12 seconds to 8 seconds since the year 2000, shorter than that of a goldfish. Although some academics have questioned the methodology behind this claim, the broader trend points toward a significant decline in modern attention spans. What would you think if I told you that boredom could actually be a superpower? Boredom can be dangerous, but avoiding boredom can be just as dangerous, perhaps even more so. Research shows that people who can tolerate boredom tend to have richer imaginations, generate more ideas, and possess stronger problem-solving abilities. In a 2014 study conducted by Sandy Mann and Rebecca Cadman, participants who were assigned boring tasks later performed better on creativity tests than those in the control group. The researchers suggested that boredom may encourage the mind to daydream and generate new ideas, making this finding especially important. The brain's default mode network, the network that becomes active when you are bored, is also involved in creative thinking, empathy, and long-term planning. When you constantly suppress this network, you are not just escaping boredom, you may also be reducing your opportunities for creativity. While this can feel beneficial in the short term, it may have negative effects on personal growth over time. Some influential thinkers describe boredom in striking ways. Søren Kierkegaard saw boredom as the root of all evil, while Arthur Schopenhauer described human life as a pendulum swinging between suffering and boredom. Jean-Paul Sartre viewed boredom as one of the moments in which people confront the emptiness of existence. But perhaps boredom is none of those things. Perhaps boredom is simply a signal from the brain saying you can no longer grow here. It is time to discover something new. The problem is that today, instead of listening to that signal, we immediately reach for our phones. As a result, we miss the curiosity, creativity, and opportunities for growth hidden behind boredom. If, instead, we directed that energy towards something more meaningful, we could grow further and create greater value in our lives. Right now, after this video ends, you will probably move on to something else, and that is completely normal. But maybe this time, before reaching for your phone, you will pause for a moment and think. Perhaps you will realize that you now understand what is happening, and instead of treating boredom as something to escape from, you can use it as an opportunity to pursue activities that promote personal growth and long-term fulfillment. You are now more informed than before, and what you choose to do next is entirely in your hands.